Hello there, my beautiful friends, and welcome back to another episode of TA with MK. My name is MK. In today's episode, we're just going to give you kind of a quick, zoomed out macro update, just from my perspective, my own personal perspective, kind of how I'm seeing the charts. A lot from just a time frame, stance, I guess you could say. Just kind of what I'm seeing that Bitcoin's done in the past, to kind of give us some clues as to maybe where it's at in this current cycle or this current bear market, if you will, and just kind of how I see things playing out potentially, or at least, from a time perspective, when I would be eyeing as being some of the best times to accumulate Bitcoin to kind of set myself up for, hopeful success in the future. So if that sounds interesting to you, please remember to like and subscribe, and let's go. It's TA with MK. It's TA with MK. Okie dokie then, so we're going to jump into the Bitcoin weekly chart. One thing I want to quickly get out of the way, and something just to keep in mind as I proceed in this video, or if you're watching even other content creators like myself that are talking about macro, their perspective, maybe predictions or whatever word you want to use, or kind of their strategy or plan. You need to have your own strategy or plan, number one. And number two, just keep in mind that Bitcoin itself is going through something, or the economy, I should say, is going through something it hasn't gone through since, 2008. So for stocks, which Bitcoin follows, they haven't gone through something like this or this type of a recession since 2008, or, of course, the dot-com bubble in 2000, the 1980s was a major recession. And in Bitcoin's entire existence, at least as far as my knowledge goes, it hasn't been in this type of environment. So myself, I'm definitely a huge fan, and so are many other content creators, of looking at what Bitcoin's done in the past, which is what we're going to do in this video, to try to forecast or at least have an idea or a plan of what it may do in the future. But at the end of the day, it will follow stocks, and this is kind of uncharted, water, so to speak, or uncharted territory that Bitcoin, in its existence at least, hasn't been a part of. So for us to say that, hey, it did this back in 2017, so we think it could do this go around in this bear market, would be a little foolish to say without at least acknowledging that, hey, this is something, Bitcoin just hasn't experienced. So I just want to kind of get that out of the way before we jump into the weekly chart. So where we're going to spend the majority of this video, or what we're going to spend the majority of this video talking about, is just kind of time frames, amount of days, because that's just something that always fascinates me as it relates to Bitcoin's chart, is at least up to this point in its history, you can find a lot of rhyme, a lot of, correlation between what it's done in the past and what it's doing, now, essentially, or at least what we can estimate that it's doing now. But its previous two bull runs, or at least what I would say are its only other two bull runs, some people consider its existence, when it first came into existence, I should say, which I believe is like 2009 or something like that. Some people consider like 2010 to be, a bull run. I think that's just a little too far back and a little too early in Bitcoin's existence to really count that data or put any weight on that data. So for me, I consider 2013, bull run number one, or at least legit bull run number one that you can, pull some data from. And a bull run number two would have been, the 2017 blow off top or high. And then our most recent one, which was, had a double top essentially, but, April blow off top, and then November of last year in 2021. And one thing that I kind of find fascinating is overall, if you just kind of look at what Bitcoin has done, at least in the 2013 and 2017 blow off top, you can find some a lot of similarities, so I guess what I'm trying to say. And one of the first being the pattern that it had after the blow off top. So you had essentially this descending triangle, which I've mentioned many times on the channel is a bearish pattern, higher probability of breaking to the downside than the upside. But basically what it consists of is a series of lower highs. That's really all it is. High, lower high, lower high, lower high. And on the underside of it, I've always considered support and resistance a zone. But ultimately, you've got the same kind of area of support being where it's bouncing. And because it's putting in lower highs, the whole idea behind this pattern is that price action is just getting more and more condensed. First, you have a lot more volatility. Eventually, it just compresses more and more and more and more and more until it's forced, in a sense, to go one way or the other. And in this case, it went to the downside. Now, before we talk any more about, what it did in that bull run, let's just hop up to 2017's blow off top here. And while it may not look exactly the same, you can kind of see the similarity as far as once it had its blow off top, that ultimately it just put in a series of high, lower high, lower high, lower high, lower high, while the bottom area of this pattern that eventually formed was just kind of the same area of support holding up. Same kind of idea. Price action was a little more volatile for the first part of that pullback, but eventually it became more and more and more condensed, and then it lost its support, right? And one thing that caught my attention anyways, and I want you to kind of take notice of as I go on in this video, is that here in 2017, from the time it had its blow off top until the time it lost that lower area that had been acting as support, you had about 378 days, which is just a little over a year, a couple weeks, about 3 weeks ish over a year. And you had the breakdown. We go back to the first one we were talking about, the first descending triangle or blow off top, where it finally lost that support that it held. It was a little over 400 days. So really just a few more weeks, a month or so longer was all that it really was. 2 months, I guess, essentially. But a very similar amount of time, right? Now, before we jumped to current price action, or I guess this last bull run that we just had, I wanted to show a couple other things that I took notice of and that I just want to mention. Not that they really mean too much in the grand scheme of things, but just things that I found kind of fascinating. And number one is that in this first bull run, once it lost that support, it spent just under a year, so 301 days, under that price level before it regained it and then never saw that price level again. So I put that in a yellow box because to me I would call that the golden area that you would have loved to have bought Bitcoin during that bear market, right? Of course, if you bought Bitcoin back in 2009 or something when it first came out, then you're a genius and any price at this point is going to be profit for you. But assuming, let's just say that you got into Bitcoin around this time, that would have been the best time to buy Bitcoin, was during that 1 year, right? You go to the other bull run of 2017 that we just talked about as well, and while it was actually even less time actually than that one. You had, like I said, a similar amount of time that it spent with that support level holding, broke. You had about 168 days, which is actually just under half of a year of what I would call the golden time in that particular bear market to have bought Bitcoin. And then similar to what we just talked about in the 2013 bear market or 14-15 bear market, it broke back above that level that you had 168 days ish to buy, and you never saw that price again. Consolidated sideways, didn't really see a major rally for a while, but you never saw that price again. Basically got back above, and the same support that was holding back here then again became the support again, and eventually it took off. So then that brings us to our most recent bull run. And if you've been a follower of my channel for long, I don't put out macro videos super often, at least videos where I spend the entire video talking about the weekly chart, for example. But I've probably put out 4 or 5 in the last year. And I've often mentioned that, in my opinion at least, this really should have been the blow off top. It made more sense just from what price action did leading up to it, from the time of the bear market to the time it broke its previous all-time high of 19,000 to how quickly it then moved up to its new all-time high of just under 65,000, and then boom, large pullback. However, that wasn't what happened, and history can change. Just like we're going to discuss right now, the way this bull market potentially ended could also be a clue that the bear market's going to be a little different. So I'm going to give kind of my scenario A, scenario B of what I believe could potentially play out. And even then, it doesn't mean it will be right, because at the end of the day, like I said earlier in the video, it's going to follow stocks, and stocks could see historic downside, potentially. But if we're just looking at Bitcoin, again, after it had its, potential blow off top, or even though it had a double top, you did still have this key area of support that once it broke its all-time high, that it flipped over here into support at around, between 27 and 28K. It bounced there once, bounced there twice. The top of the zone, which was actually up over around 32, 33K, bounced again, and ultimately it was holding temporarily here before it finally lost. And if you look at the amount of days that it spent between what I think was, should have been, or were naturally the blow off top, you had about 413 days spent before it lost that support. Now, if you remember earlier in the video, I discussed how you had this 378 days here before it lost the support that had been holding up after the blow off top. And then back here you had 413 days. Well, again, 413 days just happened to be right where we lost this major level of support. And there are people that believe, one channel particularly that I watch videos every now and then, I want to say CryptoTawithMMK University is his name, and he seems like a cool dude. I don't know him personally or anything like that, but I watch his videos now and then just to kind of see what he's thinking about the macro perspective of Bitcoin, because he does have a historic what's the word, track record of kind of calling the bigger moves in crypto, which is something that he's earned the right to be, for people to pay attention to that. And he believes the bottom is in. Now, of course, like anyone else, that's subject to change. I believe he's mentioned that. I don't watch his videos all the time, so I can't really say what he's exactly saying right at this exact moment, but I know he's on record as saying that he believes the bottom is in. Well, if he were to be correct, which he has a track record of being correct, well, that would fall in line kind of with what price action has done, for scenario A at least, on these previous two bear markets, where you had so much time spent before you lost the major area of support, again, that had been holding up the entire first part of the bear market. After the blow off top, you had this time frame that it broke down, which right now we've spent around 126 days below. Again, if you rewind back to what I said earlier, you had about 300 days below in the first bear market, below the major support that held up for the majority of the bear market. The second bear market, you had only 168 days in this little golden zone where price action spent below the main area of support that had held up for the majority of the bear market. And in this case, we are 126 days in so far. And another thing that I wanted to point out for scenario A is if we go back to these other two bear markets, you can see that from the time that it entered the golden zone to the time it put in a new all-time high, in this case was 756 days. I don't think I must not have calculated it for this one. I thought I had it on there. Maybe I deleted it on accident, but let's go back and look at that one as well. From the time that it lost its support, which would have been right around here, to the time that it put in, basically broke the all-time high back here, which was $1,150 like we discussed. How long did that take? And it looks like right here it was a little over around 800 days, give or take, a week or two. And so very similar time frame, right, between those first two bear markets. And so where would that put us before we projected out to break the all-time high that would be back here at about 65K. This one's the one I'm specifically talking about, because all this data to follow that we've been discussing would be my theory that this was, the more natural blow-off top, right? 756 days means that we might not see a new all-time high, or at least a break of that, previous high of 65K until around July of 2024, which would be the summer of 2024, right? And, if we consider this to potentially, in scenario A at least, to be the golden zone, this would be considered kind of the best time to buy Bitcoin, between this lower support of the lower side of the range, I guess you could say, at just over 18K, to the upper side of the range at about 25K. I mean, you have a range here that Bitcoin could play in, maybe for another 180 days if it's going to follow the first bear market where it spent 300 days under there. That this could be something that could be looked back on in the future as being the time we should have been buying Bitcoin. I know a lot of people are waiting for one more major capitulation. I myself am kind of more on that bandwagon, so to speak, but I'm always subject to change and open to anything. And in maybe Crypto Cruise University, where he believes the bottom is in, that would align from a time frame as this kind of being the golden zone that we're in. Even that being said, doesn't mean the golden zone has to follow exactly what it's done in the past. It could see one more leg lower. Maybe ultimately it's just more of a time frame thing. It's going to spend potentially 200 to 300 days below this support before it regains it and takes off in the next bull market. But so anyway, that is what I would consider scenario A, is that we really are in the time that we should be buying Bitcoin. Now, I'm on record as already having purchased Bitcoin at 23K and just over 20,000, which at this point I'm in the red on both, but I'm okay with that. My bigger buy orders are lower at 17 and 14K. In fact, my largest buy order is down at 14K, and I don't know if we'll see that price, but if we do, I plan on purchasing more there. And even then, I won't be all in, because if we see 14K, we might see 12, 10, 7, 8, we might see less. So anyway, so that's scenario A. All right, now we're just going to quickly discuss scenario B, which for me would be, kind of what I personally believe could be the area or from a time frame perspective at least, that could be the bottom, something to look out for, something that could rhyme a bit with the past. We will end the video by kind of discussing, well, we won't really discuss, but just know there is a scenario 3, or C, if we want to call them A, B, and C. And scenario C to me is the one that's almost impossible to predict, because scenario C for me would be kind of like the doomsday scenario, that stocks continue to get drugged lower and lower and lower. The economy continues to crash more and more and more. The recession just gets uglier and uglier. And we don't know where it would find a bottom in that case, in my opinion. Could it be that Bitcoin bottoms out at 10K like a lot of people have called for? Could it bottom out at 6K, which is a previous area of major support? Could it see 3K again? Could it go all the way back to $1.50? I don't know, and I don't think really at the end of the day, no matter how big of an expert you claim to be, that you really could know what Bitcoin would do in these uncharted times. But as far as if it just follows similar to the past, this would be my scenario B at least. And I'm only going to base this one off a couple of simple percentages. Now, one thing I didn't discuss as it relates in scenario A to what Bitcoin had done from a percentage-wise during these patterns, this descending triangle that happened in 2013 and again in 2017 from the blow-off top, was just the percentage drop that we'd had at that point before it lost that support that got us to our golden zone. And in this blow-off top, you saw Bitcoin was down just around, between 71, there was some wicks over here, we'll say somewhere just over 70%, between 71 and 73 to 4 to 5% at its, largest wick here, that it was down from its all-time high at that point to this area of support that had been holding up before it lost that, and then proceeded in this case to drop to this wick another 50%, right? Similarly, up here, or at least you'll find after I show you that it's very similar, you had this blow-off top in 2017, where from that point to the support level that had been holding, you had just over 70%, to this wick and this wick here, between 70 and 71%. Very similar to back here, the 76%, before it ultimately lost that support. The descending triangle that was supposed to break down finally did, and you saw another, or just under 50%, about 45%. So between that bear market, or I guess that blow off top, and how price action behaved from a percentage standpoint and from a time frame standpoint, it saw a very much a rhyme, I guess you could say, before dropping into its golden zone that it spent different time frames below, but in both cases less than a year below, and then broke back above and reclaimed that area as support. One thing that differs in this current blow off top and bear market that isn't the same as those two is that percentage. If you look from this blow off top, and actually we'll go from this one up here, the actual all-time high, down to the percentage, to this support level, that had been holding, here in 3 occasions during this little pullback, and then here briefly, that's only about 57, between 55 and 60%, so not quite as deep. And we also, since losing that support right here, haven't seen a 50% drop. We've only seen a 38% drop. There's a lot of schools of thoughts there. Is it just that it's a maturing asset, and so your volatility to the up and downside is just not quite as much? Because we also didn't have as high of a percentage, or as high as a blow off top either. So it could, at the end of the day, just be a more maturing asset, where even though this looks insanely volatile, it's not quite as volatile as it was back here, and especially not as volatile as it was back here from a percentage gain and a percentage loss to this point perspective, right? But there also is the school of thought that, hey, maybe this right here is kind of our descending triangle that we're now forming right before our final capitulation. And at this point, Bitcoin is down from top to bottom, just over 70%, between 70 and 75%, which does rhyme with the previous two bear markets like we just talked about. And what would it look like in scenario B if we were to see another 50%, capitulation, so to speak? Well, that would put us back down here somewhere around, these major support levels that Bitcoin flirted with during this previous bear market, which I would say would be anywhere between about 10 and, 14K, right? 10 and 12K would be kind of the more confluential areas. But at the end of the day, I guess one thing I want to leave you guys with as we kind of sign out on this video with that scenario A and scenario B is that if the economy is able to recover by the end of this year, I shouldn't say recover, but if the numbers are coming in that show that maybe the worst of it's in, because clearly the recovery is going to take time, but if the worst of it is showing signs of being in and Bitcoin's maybe able to get back on track, or at least stay on track as it has to this point with what's normal for Bitcoin, because clearly at this point everything it's done, as I just showed in this video, is very normal to what it's done in the past, as far as it's shown pullbacks that are this large in the past. If it's going to follow similarly to that, one thing that I guess is the hoping of all this is maybe a lot of the worst is behind us, and maybe we're in potentially the golden zone of this bear market. Really anything, even if it were to lose this support and go down to between 10 and 12 or 15K, whatever the bottom ultimately becomes, if it only spends say a year underneath that before ultimately it starts to recover and then regains this support, or even if it is just this support that it gains, which might be more realistic if it breaks down from here, but if ultimately this golden zone gets regained at some point and we see ourselves begin another bull run sometime in 2023, you'll look back and think, hey, if I bought Bitcoin or I was DCAing into Bitcoin at any price from the time it lost this 28K support, you're going to most likely look like a genius, in 3 to 4 to 5 years. So just keep that in mind. And with all that being said, we will call it a day. As always, if you guys are enjoying my content, on your way out, please remember to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow. It's